So we can go ahead and get. There we go. Good evening, everyone. In case you don't know me, I'm Dan Barth, Congregation Beth Shalom President, and I am very happy to welcome everyone to the third of our 3 American Jewish University presentations this year. We would like to thank the Hermelin Davidson Center for Congregational Excellence for their financial support of this and our other programs in the series. We would also like to thank Rabbi Gamer, Executive Director Shira Shapiro, Office Manager Barbara Jacobs, Shalom Vice Presidents Beth Rogers and Fran Hildebrandt, and past President Gretchen Weiner for their assistance with publicity and all of the other details that are necessary to make a program like this one possible. Our special guest tonight is Dr. Ron Wolfson. Dr. Wolfson is the Fingerhut Professor of Education at American Jewish University. He's the author of numerous books, including Relational Judaism, Using the Power of Relationships to Transform the Jewish Community. Some of us have read The Rise of the Online Synagogue, a very interesting and very thought-provoking article in Tablet magazine last April. And Dr. Wolfson was a co-author. I know you came to Beth Shalom to speak about 30 years ago. And Dr. Wolfson, I remember your appearance in our area before a large group of Jewish educators. This would have been about 10 years ago. So it is a real pleasure to welcome you this evening.
Well, thank you. And hi, everybody. It's so nice to be in your wonderful congregation again on behalf of American Jewish University. I was kidding before, but I'm not kidding when I tell you that I love to be in Michigan. I remember your congregation well. Can you believe that's 30 years ago? I hope you'll send regards from our family to Rabbi Nelson. His son Harry's a very dear friend of ours here in Los Angeles. Harry's married to one of our closest friends' daughters, the Naftalins, and we adore her, and we adore Harry. He's a very, very, very excellent guy. And Rabbi Gamer, it's nice to see you, and Cantor Sam, and it's just great to be together. Yes, our daughter Javi went to Michigan, to University of Michigan, so go blue and go green, and hang in there, Zingermans. So tonight I wanted to chat with you a little bit about Passover. Can you believe it's already it's already just a few weeks away? And it's so interesting, you know, for the men's club. Richard mentioned my involvement with the Jewish Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs, and this book, Passover, The Family Guide to Spiritual Celebration, is a book I did, you won't believe this, in 1988. This is the second edition of the book. And it's full of great ideas, and I want to share some of them with you tonight, beginning with my kippah. Everybody see my kippah? Look at that. I mean, you know, I don't know what you grew up with on Passover, but I'll tell you what I grew up with in my family in Omaha, Nebraska. My Zadie Louie, may he rest in peace, was a grocery man. So guess which Haggadah we used? The Maxwell House, of course. There's only one good thing about the Maxwell House Haggadah. It was free because the text is very traditional, it's very dense. And at the end of the Maxwell House Haggadah is I think the funniest thing I've ever seen in my entire career in Jewish education. It has an ad for Maxwell House coffee. Here's a sacred book that we bring into our homes, and at the end of the book is an ad for coffee. I mean, can you imagine if Yigal Yadin, the famous archaeologist who discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, had unraveled one of the parchments, and at the very last parchment, there was an ad for Shlomo's dates? I mean, what? I mean, can you believe it that we allow this into our home? I think someday in, 200 years from now, they're going to excavate homes in Oak Park and they're going to find a Maxwell House Haggadah and say, what were these Jews doing in the 20th and the 21st centuries? So my first suggestion is get a better Haggadah than the Maxwell House, even if it is free. And there's so many choices now, and there are so many wonderful resources for doing what I think is the most important goal of the Seder evening, which is to tell the story. I mean, I remember my Zadie, we had like 35 people for Seder. We were all, first of all, we all dressed up. Do you remember that when you used to dress up to go to Seder? I mean, it was like Shabbos or a holiday. We all dressed up. We went to Bubby and Zadie's house, Grandma and Grandpa's house, and they had taken out furniture and there was this huge table set. The kids sat in their own table. Of course, there was a kids' table, but the adults sat in this big, long table. They were smushed in because there wasn't a lot of room. And Zadie pulled out the Maxwell House and he started to read, and he got to the 4 questions. And one of the kids, youngest, got nominated. I remember when I was first asked to do the 4 questions, I hid under the table. I was so nervous. But anyway, coming out under the table, we used to have the 5th question. The 5th question was because Zadie, all he did was read, he would point to people and say, okay, Ruth, one of his daughters, you read this paragraph, you read this paragraph. Bernice, you read this paragraph. And they read it out loud from the book. And until finally we had the 5th question of the Seder, which was my Uncle Mort. My Uncle Mort was a character, and he asked the 5th question, when do we eat? And that's when my grandmother, my Bubby Ida, who was always in the kitchen through the entire Seder meal, it was so crowded at the table, she did not set a place for herself at the Seder table. She only sat down after the meal was over. My Zadie would yell to my Bubby, who was in the kitchen, okay, Ida, bring the food. And she would bring this food. That was the end of the Seder. We never finished the Seder because the grandchildren would run into the basement to beat each other up in a game we called war, and the parents would sit around and drink their Maxwell House and have their dessert and kibbutz. I don't remember ever finishing the Seder, maybe not even with Chad Gadya. Anyway, we can do a better job. So the question I want to raise with you tonight is, how do we tell the story in a way that our family and guests will understand the purpose of the Seder experience, and do it in an engaging way, especially for our family members and our friends and guests who have no clue about Jewish stuff. They're not shul goers, many of them. They don't have access to the language. And here we have this long text, both in Hebrew and Aramaic, and even the English sometimes, certainly, in the Maxwell House is difficult to follow because so much of the Seder experience resides in that Magid section. Dan and I were talking about this the other day. The section that explains the whole story of the Exodus in rabbinic midrash, which is complicated for most people because it takes little snippets of Torah text and explicates it. Well, it becomes long. So I'm always interested as an educator is what can we do to make the Seder engaging for our guests and our family members? So the first thing I want to suggest to you is the question of where do you sit? Where do you sit? Do you sit around a crowded table in your dining room? I'll never forget when my wife Susie and I first moved out here to California, to Los Angeles, we were invited to some friend's house for Seder. We all had little kids. And it was David and Shira Milgram Elcott, home. And they invited us, which was lovely. And we walked up their driveway to the front door, and we knocked on the door, and the door opened, and there were the two parents dressed as Bedouins. They had flowing robes on. They had a keffiyeh. You know what a keffiyeh is? A kind of Arab headdress. And they said to us, "Welcome to our Bedouin Seder." And I thought, oh my God, what is happening here? And we walked into the house, past the dining room. The dining room table was set up for Seder. You know, it had, china and, crystal and all that stuff. We walked right past it to the family room. The family room was a big room with a big cantilevered ceiling, like an A shape. They had taken all the furniture out of the family room, except for the cushions from the couches, which were on the floor. They had draped bed sheets from one end of the room into the middle of the room and down to the other side, so it looked like a tent. In the center of the room was, on a low coffee table, was the Seder plate. At the front of the family room was one of their kids who had a thing of water, a container of water, and said, "If you'd like to have your feet washed, we'll be happy to do that before you come into the tent, into the Seder tent." It was unbelievable. And we sat on these little cushions with our kids in our laps, and David brought out a guitar, and we started to sing all the nursery school songs that the kids knew. One day when Pharaoh woke in his bed, frogs in his head and frogs in his bed, frogs in his nose and frogs on his stove, all that. Kids were totally engaged. And we told the story of Pesach through the Haggadah and through the songs until it came time for the meal. And then we got up, like mentioned, like human beings, and we went into the dining room and had our meal. And I learned an important lesson then. Try to sit somewhere comfortable so that the evening doesn't feel cramped. And it can set a theme for the evening. In their case, it was the Bedouin tent. Now, I have a friend here in Los Angeles. Some of you might remember her. She was always on the media during the O.J. Simpson trial of all times. She's a professor of law at Loyola Marymount University. Her name is Lori Levinson, one of the brightest people I ever met. And I once said to her, "Lori, did you do anything creative for Seder?" She said, "Well, the most creative thing we ever did is we rented a camel." I said, "You what?" She said, "We rented a camel from a petting zoo, and the camel was in our front yard as people came to our house for Seder." There were no camel rides because the insurance wouldn't cover it, but there was a camel in the front yard of their home. Now, remember, it's not Michigan, it's Southern California, so the weather was okay, and they could have a camel in the front yard. I get it. I said, but what I'm trying to point out here is that set the theme, that set the engagement of the guests as they came up into the home, which was just fantastic. So think about where you seat your family and your guests and try to make it as comfortable as possible. Now I'm going to share my screen because I've got a handout that you're all going to get. And these are crafts that my wife, Susie, who's absolutely brilliant, has made over the years to engage our guests. Can you all see that? Can I just see hands or thumbs up? Okay. So this is Susie's pillow place card. When you do sit down at the table, where do I sit? So, Susie made a pillow. Now, this pillow is about this big. If you look at my screen, it's only about 4 by 4. It's 2 pieces of felt that Susie doesn't sew. So she glues 3 sides of this 2 pieces of felt to make a pillow. And then on the side that's not glued, she stuffs it with cotton and then glues down the other side. And when our kids were little, she would make these with the kids, and then she used these indelible paints, and they would make some drawings here. It's a palm tree and some grapes and the name of a person. And when they came to our table for Seder, this was the name card, like you do when you go to a party. So people knew where to sit. And best of all, it's a pillow on which to recline. You know, that's a tradition for Pesach. You're supposed to recline. It's a sign of freedom. And people got to take it home with them after the Seder. It was a party favor. Because my brilliant Susie, who is the Martha Stewart of Jewish living, before Martha went to jail, she thinks of every Jewish holiday as a theme party. And she always wants people to go home with some sort of gift, some sort of surprise gift. And this was their gift. And it solved all kinds of problems because people knew where to sit. They got a pillow to lean on, and it was just absolutely fantastic. Now, I want to ask you all a question. What wine do you use for Seder? Do you drink at the Seder? Can you put it in the chat? What wine do you serve at the Seder? And Dan, you can, if you can see the chat, could you tell us what some of them are?
Okay, so far we see Bartonura Moscato,
Good.
Carmel,
Yeah.
and I know the Manischewitz, Aaron wrote nothing but the best.
Manischewitz is nothing but the best. Are you kidding me? It's $4.99 for that swill.
Okay,
I mean, come on. That's the cheapest wine you can get for the Seder.
but
Now,
any kosher wine that is not Manischewitz.
any kosher wine that's not Manischewitz. Okay, that's good.
And then Rabbi, let's see, Hagafen Pinot Noir, Bartonura
Now we're talking. Hagafen Pinot Noir.
Moscato,
Very
grape
good.
juice. And Sandra wrote Bartonura for white and a nice red. Fran Barkin and Pinot Noir and Grigio.
Very good. Now we're talking. Okay, that's good, Dan. Thank you so much.
Sure.
You know, here's the thing. This is the second point I want to make to you about Seder giving. And we learned this from some friends, the Webbers, because the first time we were invited to their Seder, about 2 weeks before the Seder, we got an email from them giving us an assignment, homework for the Seder. We weren't asked to bring, a bottle of wine or a box of matzah or some macaroons. We were asked to prepare something to contribute to the conversation and the telling of the story. In our case, it was Elijah the prophet. Dear Ron and Susie and family, we're so pleased to have you at our Seder this year. Your assignment is to prepare a 5-minute presentation about Elijah the prophet. That was our homework assignment for the Seder. Now, we had never had a homework assignment for the Seder, but we adopted this tradition. And every year when we host Seder, we ask people to prepare something to come. It can be a skit, it could be a song, it could be some sort of presentation about some aspect of the story. And we did this, we've done this for dozens of years. And we have one guy who came to our Seder every year for about 20 years, and I can never get him to accept an assignment. He never wanted to do an assignment. His name was Steve. So I realized after 20 years, it was not his problem, it was my problem, because as the Seder leader, I had not figured out what he could contribute easily and comfortably. And then I remembered Steve was a wine connoisseur. So I said to him, you know what? We have 4 glasses of wine, 4 cups of wine. would you do the research and find 4 great wines we could have at the Seder? I will buy the wine, but you make the recommendation. And this was 20, I'm talking about 15 years ago already. And so Steve got very excited and he took me up on it and he did the research and he called me up. He said, here's the Pinot Grigio and here's the red and here's the white and here's the sparkling. And I bought these wines and we turned, well, this is what happened. The very first thing, what's the very first thing you do at Seder besides lighting candles? It's Kaddish, it's wine. So for the regulars at our Seder, they couldn't believe that the first person I called on that year was Steve. So Steve gets up, he holds up the first bottle of wine and he says, my friends, tonight the first selection for our first cup of wine is the Bartonura Moscato. It's in the famous blue bottle. It's very popular because it has a kind of sweet, apple-y taste. And he goes into this whole, if you swill it in your Kiddush cup before you drink, he goes like a connoisseur of wine. He unbelievable. And everybody loved it. Everybody loved it. Every cup of wine, I called on Steve and he explained the wine we were going to enjoy. And thank God, there are many, many, many selections now of kosher for Pesach wine and by the way, you'll be able in your handout, here's my last year's, the new year, the 223 is not out yet, but here are the best kosher wines from 2022. And their prices and some reviews. And it's a fantastic thing that you can do now is turn your Seder into a wine tasting. And my point is that it made Steve one of the heroes of the evening because he participated in a way that he could participate and bring his passion and his skill and his knowledge to the table. And I've been talking about this now since I wrote this book, the Passover, Guide to Passover. And I taught it at American Jewish University for many years in a workshop, just like I'm doing for you tonight. And one year I gave the suggestion, and the following year, the same couple came back for a double dose for a second time. And they said, Ron, all the ideas that you shared with us, we did so many of them. We did a few of them, not too many. We did a few of them. They were big hits, except for one. And I said, well, which one didn't work? And they said, the wine tasting. And I said, well, what happened with the wine tasting? And they said, well, we got the wines that you suggested and we brought them for the table and nobody liked it. I said, what do you mean they didn't like it? They said, they told all our guests that we want the Manischewitz. We're missing the Manischewitz because these other wines don't taste like Seder. Now that's the power of memory. So now I adjust my suggestion. I say, you know what? First cup of wine, use the $4.99 bottle of Manischewitz or Mogen David or whatever it is. And then the second, third, and fourth wine, have some nice wines on the table. By the way, I shared this with a friend of mine at American Jewish University last year, Debbie Molnar, and she said to me, Ron, we go a step further. We don't, for us in our home, the kosher for Passover wines are not critical. We'll use any wines. So I said, well, what do you do with the wine tasting? She said, well, we discovered 4 wines that help tell the story. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, one is from the Prisoner Winery. That's our first cup of wine because the Haggadah says to start with our degradation. As prisoners, that's how you start the story. I said, well, that's very clever. What's the second wine? She said, Unshackled. Unshackled is the second cup of wine. Okay, now I'm interested. What's the third wine? From the Freedom Winery. These are real wineries. I mean, you can Google it after we're done tonight. You won't believe it. And the fourth wine, you really won't believe this. The fourth wine they use is called redemption. I mean, what? But how clever and how wonderful, right? I mean, just amazing. Okay, here's the next thing I want to share with you. And that is the importance of buying time. Buying time. The problem with the Seder, and for many people, is that it starts and there's nothing to eat. And there's nothing to eat for a long time. So one way to handle that is to tell everybody to have a snack before they come to your Seder. If you're going to spend an hour or two telling the story. Another thing you could do is cut it short. I get that. And there are plenty of Haggadot that are short. Here's one from the Jewish Grandparents Network called the Dayenu Seder. It's 10 minutes long. You can get it online from the Jewish Grandparents Network. It's literally 10 minutes long. And it's not bad. So those are options. But if you want to spend some time telling the story, there's a good idea. Here's a good idea. Buy time by serving an appetizer during karpas, during the typical greens. So here's one of Susie's favorite appetizers. You see the little froggy-like thing on the hand? That's a green avocado. And it's on its side, and Susie takes a slice of the avocado out of the top, and that's the mouth. And then the little thing coming out of the mouth is a red pepper as a tongue. And it's sitting in a bed of garnishes. Typically, she does half of a hard-boiled egg, where she's taken the yolk out and put in one of those little fishlets, the little gefilte fish balls, inside the hole there, the cavity of where the yolk was. And then there's cucumbers and celery sticks and carrot sticks and stuff like that. And of course, when our kids were little, frogs were everything. There were a froggy theme all the time. We had frogs. So this is an appetizer. She calls it Bulrush Babes in Baskets, to remember the story of Moshe, of Moses. And there are even googly eyes at the top. You see, you can use sliced black olive, but if you saw the movie that won Best Picture, Everything, Everywhere, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, it's a crazy movie, but googly eyes are prominent in the movie. And that's one of Susie's great innovations. And the idea is to buy time. Here's another way to buy time. Do you pass things at your Seder? You pass a bowl of salt water, and you pass a bowl of parsley or greens, and you pass a bowl of haroset. So Susie once said, what a waste of time. What a waste of time. We're not going to pass anything this year. I said to Susie, what do you mean? She says, we're going to make these. This is Susie's famous Passover personal Seder plate. You see the bird? It's a bird. The body of the bird is a hard-boiled egg. The head of the bird is a radish, a red radish, with the pipik sticking out. You know what the pipik is. And on either side of the radish, she puts cloves for the eyes. Here come the red and green pepper for tail and wings. And this is on a bed of parsley. And here come the fish balls again, the gefilte fish balls with grain, with horseradish on top of it as a garnish. And when people came to our table, this is what was on their plate on top of the china. And with a little kiddush, you know what a little kiddush cup is that you get at the Oneg Shabbat, a little for grape juice or something, with a little cup of haroset and a little cup of salt water and a piece of matzah, you have everything you need to celebrate the ritual of the Seder with this birdie. Now, I can see a few of your faces, and especially the women here, they're giving me a verkrinte punim. Do you know any Yiddish? like a sad face, because you're saying, wait a minute, I have 28 people for Seder. I'm busy enough as it is. I don't have time to make 28 of these things. But now I encourage you to think like Susie thinks, who's a great Jewish educator. She doesn't make them anymore. Our guests make these when they come and arrive at our house. And on a table, she has an aluminum pan filled with hard-boiled eggs, shelled. You can get them at Costco. And then she has radishes, and then she has the green pepper, and then she has the parsley, and one model of the birdie. And she invites our guests, because you say come at 6:30, so some come at 6:25, and some come at 6:30, and some come at 6:40. As guests arrive, this is what they create. They create their own personal Seder plate. By the way, I forgot to tell you, when our kids were little and they came to our house and the theme was frogs, can you see that in my box? That's our little nature company, Froggy. It's a motion detector. So when people came to our front door, this is what greeted them. Sets the theme of the evening. Here's another way to buy time. Susie calls this Karpas capers. How many of you have ever gotten, what do you call it? Edible arrangements? Could I just see hands if you got an edible arrangement, like it was fruit on a skewer? Well, this is vegetables on a skewer. Susie took the same idea and took a big jicama. Do you know what a jicama is? It's like an oversized radish with a brown skin. So she took the jicama and skinned it and sliced it in little 1/4-inch slices. And then she has these Jewish cookie cutters. And when our kids were little, she would have them push the cookie cutter into the jicama. And now I have a Jewish star jicama, and I have a Torah scroll jicama. And she put it on the end of a bamboo skewer and stuck it in a basket, a wicker basket with a red cabbage covered up with kale or parsley. And it's gorgeous. And it becomes a vegetable centerpiece. And for people to use for karpas, an edible centerpiece. I remember that year when she did it, she didn't tell me about it in advance. She said, I used to buy a big, expensive, centerpiece of flowers. Ronnie, don't get flowers this year. And this was in the center of our table. And when he did the blessing for karpas, Borei Pri Adama, fruit of the earth, she told our guests to eat the centerpiece. Please eat the centerpiece. And you know what? It bought time to tell the story. And that's what's really important. How about that? I think that's so much fun. Let me talk to you a minute about, before we get to the parody songs, I'm going to stop the share for a minute so you can see me. Okay, so here's another thing I recommend you do. Bring your talent to the Seder. So one year we went to our friends Mickey and Sharon's house for Seder. Again, we had kids, little kids, and we start the Seder and it's going fine. And then when it came time for Magid, for telling the story, Mickey, whose passion was amateur, he was an amateur magician. Mickey and his kids went into the other room and came back a couple minutes later dressed as Egyptians. Mickey was the Pharaoh, and the little kids were his assistants. And the first thing he says to all of us is, they did a whole skit, and the skit went something like this. Oh, this Moses, he's coming and telling me, driving me crazy. He's telling me to let the people go. I don't want to let the people go, but he says the God's going to cut a terrible thing. I have such a headache from this, and I'm so thirsty. And he says to one of their kids, go to the beautiful Nile River and bring me a delicious clear glass of water from the Nile. So the kid goes and comes back with a clear glass and a pitcher of water. And the father, now pretending to be the Pharaoh, says, "Oh, I can't wait to drink this delicious water." And he pours the water into the glass and it turns into blood. It turns red. You should have seen the kids' faces, the other kids, the guests, like our kids at the table, were just mesmerized that the water had turned into blood. Oh, the Pharaoh says, that's what Moses said, that the God was going to turn the water into blood. Oh, now I have such a headache. Get my medicine box. Another kid comes with a box. And the Pharaoh father, he knocks on the box and he opens it. He turns it around. There's nothing in it. He opens it up. He shows everybody there's nothing in the box. It's empty. He turns it around again. He hits it. He opens it up. There's nothing in it. Third time he opens up the box. Frogs come jumping out of the box. Frogs, not real frogs, plastic frogs. It was a magician's box. He said, these Israelites, this Moses, it's driving me crazy. And now you see it's getting dark outside. All of a sudden it gets dark. The lights are off in the room. There's like a thunderclap, and suddenly hail comes down onto the table at the Seder. It was ping pong balls. Have you ever been to you remember the political conventions when they had balloons on the last day in a net above the conference center, the big auditorium, and they pull a string, come down the balloon? That's what he had rigged up with ping pong balls that were hail. I want to tell you one of the most amazing Seder experiences we ever had, because I'm still talking about it 35 years later. He's the guy, Mickey, who also made the afikomen disappear. You know that you break the afikomen at the beginning of the Seder, and so he before he did the whole skit, he takes the middle matzah, he breaks it in half, and he says to the kids, he says, kids, we can't finish the Seder until you find this at the end of the meal. You have to find this afikomen. So I'm putting it in this thing, and he puts it in the afikomen holder, and he has everybody feel it, and everybody's feeling the afikomen in this satin thing, the afikomen holder, so you could feel it. Feel it. He goes around the table, everybody feels it. He says, now kids, watch carefully. And he says something in Hebrew, some mishmash in Hebrew, and he holds up the afikomen. It's gone. It's gone. It's disappeared. Again, everybody is like beyond shocked that he made the afikomen disappear. It was a magician's satin napkin or kind of thing with a hidden pocket. And he put the little piece of afikomen in the hidden pocket and made it disappear. You could hold it up. Now, if you don't go to a magic store, you could do it the way I do it, which is to have a shill at the table. I break it up, put it in the afikomen holder, have everybody hold it. The last person, usually Susie, knows what I'm doing, and I drop it into her lap surreptitiously. And then I hold it up and it's disappeared. Now, some of you are going to say, what are you doing, Ron? And I'm telling you that these are the ways you can engage your guests and your family in a creative Seder. It's not that this is all we do. We read the Haggadah, we do the rituals, but we kind of punctuate the Seder at various times with this kind of creativity. And you know what? People love it. I'm going to share screen again. Let me see if I can get the right thing here. Can you see my screen now? Can you see the picture of this very cute girl and her mommy lighting candles. Can you see that, Dan? This is from an article in the Los Angeles Times from 2014. I met the religion reporter at the LA Times about 3 weeks before Pesach, and he was so interested in what we do. He said, "Could I come and see your Seder?" And he did a 2-page story in the Los Angeles Times about our Pesach Seder. So I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures. There's a whole long story here that I recommend to you. I'll put the thing in the chat. Hold on a second. Okay. Now let me this is my daughter Javi and our granddaughter Ellie at the time. She is now 12, lighting candles. This is Susie and me greeting everybody. Kissing after after lighting candles. Now, if you look at this picture of our table, you see the plate here. There's the birdies that we made on the appetizer table. And I want to get, oh, there's the matzah kippah. And there's the birdie again. And there's the nice glass of wine, you know, varietal. Now, this is the greatest story. I gave homework to my brother, Bob, who for 10 years was the director of all the regions of the Anti-Defamation League. I gave him the assignment of Avadim Hayinu Lefaro b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Bobby comes to Los Angeles from Omaha and a day early before Seder. And he says, "Ronnie, take me to Home Depot." I go to take him to Home Depot. And I said, "What do you need at Home Depot?" He says, "I got to buy some stuff." Came time, we were going through the Haggadah. Came time for Avadim Hayinu, and I turned to Bobby. Bobby's going to tell us about we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. He pulls out of his Home Depot bag frog tape. This is green tape. He cuts off, you see he's holding it. He cuts off little pieces of tape and he says, "Okay, turn to your neighbor and put the tape over everyone's mouth." Then he brings green twine and he says, "Now tie up everybody's hands with the green twine." This is what it was like to be enslaved. How brilliant was that? How brilliant was that? It was unbelievable. That's my brother, Bobby. Oh, and these, you know, some of you have probably seen these masks. I have some, you know, this is lice, you know, for the plagues. That's a very good picture of the birdie. There are lots of ways to do the plagues. Here's the big table. We had noisemakers and you know, different kinds of tambourines and so on that we would hand out, and we would to help the singing along. Matzo ball soup, and there's our little grandson at the time, Gabe. Okay, I'm gonna stop this, and let's go back to our handout. And you know, Dan and I were talking last week with Fran, and he said, "You know, Ron, the biggest problem a lot of people have is this Magid. It's this long section, and you're supposed to tell this story." And I'll tell you what we do. We read that whole long section is based on 4 verses from Torah that explain the whole story of the Exodus. 4 verses. And that's what all the explanation is. But we've come to love the parody songs. There are hundreds of them now. When I was first starting in the field, there was one parody song. "Said the father to the children, at the Seder you will die." Now there are hundreds of parody songs. And I included, this is a list of some of my favorites. And then I thought we would sing. Now you have to stay muted, but you can sing along. So let's sing along Afi Coleman's Round the Tables. Can you see the words? I know it might be hard to read the words.
We're not seeing that. I think you have to stop sharing the
and start again?
and then start again, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Coming at you. How
There we
about now?
Yep,
See afikomen's around the tables?
yep.
Okay, this is to the tune of She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain. And we sing this when we break the afikomen. So I'll sing, you can sing along, but stay muted, please. Otherwise, it's a cacophony. Afikomen's round the tables, that is where. If you're looking for it, children, please take care. You don't have to be a Roman far to find the afikomen. Just know that it isn't hidden in my hair. Afikomen isn't hidden in my hat. You are much too smart. I never do just that. I can see it on your faces that you've thought of many places, but it isn't near the seat where I have sat. Now, without the afikomen, we'll just sit. We can't go on with the Seder without it. So please hurry, kids, and find it. There's a present right behind it. We'll thank you, and tonight you'll be a hit. Rabbi, this was written by Rabbi Jack Pressman of blessed memory, who came to one of our workshops and realized that there were no great parody songs, and he wrote several of them, which are in my book, Passover Seder book. So I recommend that. And all you need to do is a Google search of Passover parody songs, and you'll find some fabulous, fabulous things. There are also on YouTube many Passover parody songs. One of my favorites is 613. It's spelled SIX13. Has a number of great Passover parody songs that you could just, if your tradition allows, you push a button and they sing Uptown Funk Passover. Here's another one that another idea I want to share with you that Fran asked me about. She says, you know, when you get the kids to search for the afikomen, sometimes it's a tragedy. Not a tragedy, but you know, I mean, look, my brother Doug is still in therapy because there were 3 boys in our family, and in all the years we did Seder, Doug never found the afikomen. I mean, this has been a very difficult thing for him to deal with most of his life. So when it came time in our family to find the afikomen, Susie and I came up with a afikomen jumble word search. I don't know if you do puzzles, but this is a word search. You know, there are 14 steps of the Seder. You know, many of you know the Kadesh, Orchatz, Karpas, Yachat. So we put that, all those words on a big poster board. And then I took one letter out of each of those words. So out of Kadesh, I put an A on a 3x5 card. Out of Orchatz, I took an R. So now I've got 14 letters. And I spread them around the house. And when it came time to look for the afikomen, I showed the kids who were going to search these little 3x5 cards with letters on them. I said, there are 14 of them in the house. Go find them. Well, there were so many that the kids could find 1 or 2 or 3. Once they found all 14 of these cards with the letters on them, they brought them to the table. And I turned to the adults and I said to the adults, these 14 letters spell a clue to where the real afikomen is. So now the parents and the kids are on the floor and they're taking these cards and they're trying to figure out the 2-word clue to where the real afikomen was. And the answer is, whoops, at refrigerator. The letters spelled at refrigerator. And then the kids run to the refrigerator, they find the afikomen, everybody gets a prize. And that's a way to include everybody in the afikomen search. And finally, before we have some questions, making your own Seder Haggadah is a wonderful thing to do. This is one that I collected many years ago. You see this, 1991. The 40th consecutive Pallet Family Seder. So large, they had it at the Dorel Beach Hotel. But what's cool about their Haggadah is that it starts with a picture of the family from the 40s and the 50s. And then if I don't have the whole thing to show you, but the Haggadah was the basic text of the Haggadah with photos and stories of the family, who got married this year, who had children, who had a special anniversary, and they make it like a family document that makes the whole Seder come alive. And it's such a wonderful idea. It's so easy to create your own Haggadah these days that I recommend it highly, and personalize it. Tell the stories of your family as you enjoy the Seder evening. Okay, so we have about 8 minutes left. Let's have some questions, some ideas, and then we'll wrap up our hour. I think Dan or Fran, someone's going to call on people.
Looking, is there anything in the chat or hand
I
raised?
put in the chat the link for the LA Times article, which I recommend to you because Kurt Streeter, the journalist who now writes for the Sports of the Times, the New York Times, was our guest, and he brought along a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer. That's why those photographs are so great of our Seder. Anybody have a great creative idea, something you do for Seder that makes it engaging?
Yes. We've done a couple of things.
Please, Vicki.
My daughter, when I have 8 grandchildren, and a few years ago, before COVID, at the Seder, my daughter would get them together and do a little skit for Magi.
Nice.
And, you know, the skit wasn't always the same. One year was really all about the plagues, and they had frogs, and they had something to throw around for each one. And one time it was more about, you know, baby Moses, and they had a basket with a baby doll in it, and you know, they worked out a little skit. And the other thing is, I have made my own Haggadah. Now, it didn't have family stories in it, but I took a whole bunch of different ones, kids ones and things like that, and picked and chose and made a loose leaf of the parts that I liked from different and put them together.
Wonderful. That's a great idea. I love that because it becomes personal then. And the one thing I would recommend, though, some people, I think, make a mistake in having different Haggadot for your guests. It's very important to have the same Haggadah for everybody. Otherwise, people can't find the page and they get lost. You can have a pile of different Haggadot. I have friends who have multiple copies of Haggadot. You know, there are over 4,000 editions of the Haggadah at the Jewish Theological Seminary Library. 4,000. I mean, there's a Haggadah for the liberated lamb. That's the vegetarian Haggadah. There's the Freedom Seder that Arthur Roscoe did many years ago. There are dozens, hundreds and hundreds of. We've always felt permission, and this is another important thing I want to tell you. We've always felt permission to take the basics of the Seder experience and the ritual and the story and make it live for us in our generation. In every generation, this is the most important line in the whole Haggadah. In every generation, we should feel as if we were liberated from Egypt. So that's, to me, that gives us permission to create our own Haggadah, to do these creative things, to tell the story and make it live for us in our time. So lovely, Vicki. That's a great idea.
Ron,
yeah, please.
Tanner Sam made a comment in the chat and said that weather permitting, they take an Elijah walk, and maybe Tanner Sam could tell us about what that means.
Yeah, what do you do, Tanner Sam?
Let me unmute. Yeah, I mean, we after we do Elijah, we go outside and we walk around the neighborhood a little.
I love it.
Walk off the meal and then come back and finish if everyone comes back. That's the thing. You may lose
know. There's a chapter in my book called there's
We
a
take
little
away the
section-
keys to their cars. So,
I know. There's a little section in my book called "How do you get them back to the table after they've had dessert?"
That's the problem.
But you know what? We did that a couple of times with when our kids were little, and in our neighborhood, there are a bunch of Jewish families that were friends.
Oh,
And
that's
we would
nice.
go over to the Horwitzes, and unannounced, we knocked on the door, and they opened the door, and we started singing. Eliyahu.
Oh, that's great.
How about coming with us, and we'll go down to the Feinsteins? And then so now we've got 15 people walking down Densmore Avenue. And then we knock on the Feinstein's door. Hey, Eliyahu, you want to come with us to the Goldbergs? Okay, come with us. We had like 25 people walking in the neighborhood.
Great idea.
And it was like, instead of, why do the Christians have caroling? We Jews should have Elijah walks. I love it. Cantor Sam, great.
I think Aaron is raising his hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I
So I'll
am-
just say a sort of a variation on the different Haggadahs. So there was a family that I started going to when I was in college, and then later my girlfriend, now wife, joined for many years. And what they did is everybody got 2 Haggadahs.
Oh.
There was the one that we all communally used, which was of course the base Maxwell, because that came from Sinai. And then everybody got a second Haggadah, and every night, every year, and both nights, everybody got a different one. And everybody sort of followed along in both. So when we read, everybody got their turn reading a paragraph, we read it out of the Maxwell House, which they had cut up. We read every word, but they had cut it up, and the kids had decorated it with their own artwork when they were younger, and
Right.
so it's very personalized. But we might, and anyone could bring anything from their second Haggadah. So we might we'd be reading it and say, well, but the Ben Ish Chai, had this thought about it, or the Abarbanel had this thought, and then the next night somebody else would have that Haggadah. So it was always an interesting that, and we also did ping pong balls. We'd throw those around at each other, even though we were 20s and 30s and 40s without little kids.
What's so interesting about that, Aaron, is that Seder, in our experience, and many people will say this, in our experience, when our kids were little, we had a kid-oriented Seder, and as they grew older, it was a little more, substantive in terms of talking about issues that are raised in the story or whatever. And here's the important but. We're all little kids at heart. So I find that when we do things to engage the kids, the adults and even the grandparents really love it, because it's fun. And I'm not afraid to have fun at the Seder. I mean, the Seder is, I think, the greatest evening in the Jewish calendar, because a lot of people don't belong to a synagogue or even go to high holidays. But the vast majority of American Jews are either giving Seders or invited to a Seder. So it's an opportunity for us who are regulars in Jewish life to open up Jewish practice to them in a creative way. So I love these ideas. We have time for one more story. Gail, I saw Gail wanted to say something.
Yeah, you mentioned something about an extra question.
Yeah.
Every year, one of our grandsons who's about to enter U of M, when he was in preschool, first time he came to our Seder, he'd come to Shabbos meals all the time. But so at our Seder, he's looking at the table, and we said, well, what's wrong, Matthew? He says, where's the challah?
Exactly.
We said, oh, Matthew, well, that's a good question, because we're going to answer that later on in the Seder.
Yeah, that's great, Cantor Sam. One of my favorite questions to ask at the Seder is this: is matzah bread? All right, how many of you think matzah is bread? Can I see hands? How many say it's not bread? It's bread.
Yeah, it is.
Because we have 2 blessings for the matzah. Hamotzi lechem mina aretz is the first. Al achilat matzah is the second. It's just unleavened bread. So it's a great, just asking little questions like that is also a wonderful way to engage your guests. And, a lot of people bring up topics of current events or current interest. I mean, that's another thing to do as well. Well, we're at 5:31. I want to end with one last idea that I got from my dear friends, David and Sarah Aftergood. We went to their Seder a few years ago, and it was a super Seder. I mean, it started at 6:30. We didn't end till 1 o'clock in the morning. It was extraordinary. A couple of the many wonderful things that they did, when David and Sarah greeted us at the door, they were wearing baseball caps. No, they were wearing keffiyehs, like a Bedouins, and then they changed the baseball caps after we told the story of redemption. So it was prisoner and then free. Sarah brought out charoset, unbelievable, on a silver tray with this huge piece of, a pile of charoset that looked like a pyramid. She shaped it like a pyramid and had little insects on it. I mean, I don't know how she made it, but it was, sticky charoset. And it was incredible. But the greatest thing they did at the end of the thing, just before we sang Chad Gadya, it's like 12:45 in the morning. And I'm thinking there's nothing more they can do. Oh no. Sarah comes out with a silver tray with Seder fortune cookies. What, you ask, is a Seder fortune cookie? It was 2 little pieces of Tom matzah cracker, two of them, tied in a ribbon with a fortune inside. Most of the fortunes were quite serious, and what she did is she passed around the silver tray. Everybody took one at random. So, and then they had to open up their fortune cookie and read it out loud. So one is, may there be peace in the world. Another one was, may we all enjoy good health. And then Susie got one and she opened it up, and hers, she read it out loud. Everyone was on the floor laughing. Hers was, her Seder fortune cookie said, isn't the hostess pretty? That was good. And then the one I got was the best of all. My fortune was, you get to stay and help clean up this mess. When you go to the LA Times article, you'll see a fabulous photo of all of us sitting around away from the table, reading our fortune cookies to each other at the end of the evening. I want to wish you all a wonderful, sweet, kosher, and happy Passover experience. Thanks to the American Jewish University for arranging this, and thanks to all of you for inviting me. Please say hi to everybody at Congregation Beth Shalom.
Dr.
Thank you,
Wolfson,
Rabbi.
thank you. Oh, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation this evening, and you gave us a lot of wonderful ideas. It really was fantastic to have you with us tonight. Although this was the final program in our series, I really encourage everyone to check out the numerous online offerings offered by American Jewish University. We are very proud of our Maven partnership with AJU. And I know that some of the classes and some of the presentations might not be at the most convenient times for everybody, but AJU has a wonderful on-demand library, and the offerings are very inexpensive. So again, thank you so much. You really gave us a great deal to think about tonight.
Thank you, everybody. All the best.
I put my
Thank you.
email in the chat.
Thank
If
you.
everybody wants a copy of Ron's presentation from this evening, the handout, please send me an email and I will send it. For some reason, I can't load it into the Zoom chat. So
My email's also in the chat. It's rwolfson@aju.edu. I'd love to hear from you anytime.
so email either one of us and we can get you a copy of the handout for tonight. Thank you,
Great.
everyone.
And don't do too many of these
Thank you. It
ideas.
was
Do a few.
wonderful.
Ron,
It was great.
Thank
Thank
you. Really
you.
enjoyed
Thank
it.
you. Thanks so
Yashikoa
much.
reminded
Thank
me of
you.
Synagogue
Thank you.
2000.
Oh, thank
Yes,
you.
it
Yeah,
does.
we had a good time then, didn't we?
Yeah, it was good. Good time.